All right, get ready for a chillin' one today. We're diving deep into a case you guys specifically requested, and let me tell you, it's got all the elements of a true crime thriller, the Hinterkaifeck murders. This one, even for seasoned true crime fans, is gonna stick with you.
What makes Hinterkaifeck so fascinating is it's not just the murders themselves, but the bizarre events leading up to them and even afterwards. It's like a puzzle where the pieces just don't seem to fit.
You got it. Picture this rural Bavaria, Germany, back in 1922. We've got the secluded farmhouse, Hinterkaifeck, where the Gruber family lived. Andreas, the father, Cecilia, the mother, their widowed daughter, Victoria Gabriel, and her two young children, 7-year-old Cecilia and 2-year-old Joseph. Oh, we can't forget the new maid, Maria Baumgartner, who, talk about bad timing, started working there the very day of the murders.
That isolation, that remoteness of the farmhouse really plays a key role here. It adds this layer of eerie seclusion, making everything that much more unsettling.
Okay, so put yourself in this farmhouse. Weeks before the murders, things start to get strange. Andreas finds footprints in the snow leading right up to the house, but none leading away. Weird, right?
Definitely strange.
Then there's unexplained footsteps in the attic at night. A mysterious newspaper appears that nobody remembers buying. And get this, the previous maid quit because she was convinced the house was haunted. What do you think? Just random events, or could they be connected to the murders?
It's hard to say for sure, but they certainly add a layer of intrigue, almost as if someone was watching them, maybe trying to intimidate the family.
It's something straight out of a horror movie. But on April 4th, 1922, the story takes a horrifying turn. Neighbors discover the crime scene. 4 adults, Andreas, Cecilia, Victoria, and the maid, Maria, are found brutally murdered in the barn. The 2 children, little Cecilia and Joseph, they're dead inside the house. And the murder weapon, a mattock, that heavy farming tool, the violence, it's just unimaginable.
The crime scene itself is incredibly disturbing. The way the bodies are positioned, the choice of weapon, the sheer brutality of it all. It points to a very personal, almost enraged attack. This wasn't just about killing, it was about inflicting pain.
And here's where it gets even more disturbing. Evidence suggests the killer didn't just run off. They stayed on the farm for days after the murders, fed the livestock, even ate the family's food. It's like they were trying to erase the family's existence and take their place.
It makes you wonder what kind of person could do that. To remain in that environment, surrounded by what they had done, that level of detachment is truly unsettling.
Right. So the investigation kicks off, and over 100 people are questioned. There's neighbors who might have had grudges, disgruntled workers, even Victoria's rumored lover, Lorenz Schlittenbauer.
Yeah, and it's important to point out that the exact nature of their relationship is still unclear. Some accounts suggest they were romantically involved, while others point to animosity, perhaps over property or inheritance.
So many potential suspects, so many possible motives, and yet, despite all the leads, the investigation hits a wall. No solid evidence, no confession, the case goes cold.
It's the lack of a clear suspect, a clear motive, that makes this case so frustrating. It's like a sea of possibilities, but with no compass to guide us.
And then there are those dark rumors swirling around the family, right? Whispers of an incestuous relationship between Andreas and his daughter, Victoria. Questions about little Joseph's paternity. Was it Andreas or maybe Lorenz?
The incest rumors are particularly disturbing. It's alleged that Andreas fathered Joseph, making him both father and grandfather to the child. This adds a whole other layer of complexity to the case and raises questions about whether these family secrets could have somehow motivated the murders.
It's a tangled web of secrets and possible motives, but what gets to me is the psychology of the killer. They commit these horrific acts, and then they just settle in on the farm. It's a level of detachment that's just chilling. What do you think that says about them?
It's almost as if they wanted to not just end the family's lives, but to replace them, to step into their shoes and carry on as if nothing had happened. It's a truly disturbing thought, and one that continues to baffle experts even today. It really is a chilling thought, isn't it? To try and understand what could drive a person to not only commit such a brutal act, but then to stay there, surrounded by what they had done. That level of, I guess you could say, psychological detachment, it's perplexing.
It really is. And it's not just the act itself, right? It's the sheer brutality of it. The level of violence involved, it suggests something more, like a deep-seated rage, maybe even hatred. Yeah. What are your thoughts on the murder weapon, the mattock?
The mattock, well, it's a heavy, blunt instrument, a tool a farmer would use. But in this context, it takes on a much more sinister meaning. The choice of weapon, I think, is very telling. It wasn't a crime of passion using whatever was at hand. It suggests premeditation, a deliberate choice to cause as much pain as possible.
And the way well, the bodies were found just stacked in the barn, almost dehumanizing, you know what I mean? Like they weren't even people anymore.
Absolutely. There's a complete lack of respect for the victims, a coldness, you could almost say, a methodical approach to how they were, well, disposed of. Again, it just reinforces the idea that this wasn't some random act of violence. It feels deeply personal, driven by a real deep animosity.
That's interesting you say that because it brings us back to those family secrets we were discussing earlier, the rumors of incest, the questions surrounding Joseph's paternity. Do you think any of that could have played a role in the motive?
It's definitely possible. If any of those rumors turned out to be true, it paints a picture of a very dysfunctional family dynamic, full of tension and resentment, maybe even fear. Imagine living in that kind of environment, all those secrets and lies bubbling under the surface. It's not hard to imagine how things could, well, erupt.
And what about Lorenz, Victoria's supposed lover? Do you think his actions after the murders were, I don't know, just grief? Or could he have been involved somehow?
It's certainly strange behavior. Going into the crime scene, handling the bodies. It definitely raises questions. Was he truly just overcome by grief, or was he maybe trying to, I don't know, observe the scene more closely? Perhaps even remove evidence? Investigators at the time were definitely suspicious, but they never found any concrete proof to link him to the crimes.
It's almost like we have all these pieces of a puzzle,
Yeah.
but we just can't figure out how they fit together. Over 100 years later, and we're still left with so many questions.
That's the nature of cold cases, I guess. Sometimes, despite our best efforts, the truth remains elusive. We're left to analyze what we have, to speculate, and to hope that someday new information will surface that will help us solve the puzzle.
It's kind of like the farmhouse itself, demolished just a year after the murders. Now it's just an empty space where a family once lived, now filled with nothing but questions and whispers of what happened that night.
The fact that they demolished the farmhouse is interesting. It's almost like they were trying to erase the memory of the tragedy, bury the past. But of course, you can't demolish memories and mysteries. They linger.
Speaking of memories, what kind of impact do you think this case had on the local community?
Well, imagine living in a small rural village in 1922. A brutal, unsolved murder happens right in your midst. The fear, the suspicion, I imagine a sense of unease would permeate everything. I doubt anyone ever really felt safe again, knowing that the killer was still out there, never brought to justice.
It's a haunting thought. And it's not just the local community, right? This case, it continues to fascinate people all over the world, even a century later. Why do you think we're still so drawn to unsolved crimes? What is it about them that holds such enduring fascination?
I think it's the unanswered questions, the mystery that draws us in. As humans, we have this need for resolution, for closure. And when a crime goes unsolved, it leaves this void that we try to fill with theories and speculation. With our own interpretation of the facts, we get to play armchair detective, trying to piece together the clues and crack the case.
It's like our own personal true crime obsession, right? But beyond the intrigue, there's also that, I don't know, desire to try and understand, to make sense of the darkness, the evil that exists in the world.
Yeah, I think there's this urge to confront the uncomfortable reality that sometimes terrible things happen and we may never know why. But I also think there's an element of hope in there, too. Hope that maybe, just maybe, by examining these cases, by learning from them, we can prevent similar tragedies from happening again.
It's almost like a reminder that the past, even the darkest parts of it, can hold valuable lessons for us in the present. But for me, what makes this case so unforgettable, it's not just the brutality of the crime, it's the psychological puzzle it presents. We've talked about the brutality, the killer's strange behavior after the crime, the family secrets. But something that keeps popping into my head is this all happened way back in 1922. Can you imagine trying to investigate a case like this back then? I mean, without all the fancy forensic tools we have now.
Oh, it was a completely different world, forensics-wise. I mean, think about it. DNA analysis didn't exist. Investigators had to rely on fingerprints, footprints, what witnesses said, a lot of good old-fashioned deduction. They had to be incredibly careful, piecing together tiny bits of evidence to build their case.
Makes you really appreciate the dedication of those early investigators, working with such limited resources, but they still managed to track down hundreds of leads, interviewed tons of people. It's amazing they didn't just give up in frustration.
Absolutely. And they had to deal with things we might not even think about today, like communication, Travel. Everything was much slower. Imagine trying to track down a lead in the next town over. Could take days just to get there and back.
It's mind-blowing when you think about how those limitations must have shaped their entire investigation.
Uh-huh.
But I'm also really curious about the impact this must have had on the community. I mean, just knowing a killer was out there somewhere uncaught, that must have been terrifying.
Oh, without a doubt. Picture yourself in that small Bavarian village surrounded by farmland and forest. And suddenly, this family in a remote farmhouse is brutally murdered, and the killer just disappears. That would shatter any sense of security, wouldn't it?
It's like a nightmare come true. Do you think that fear, that uncertainty, ever truly went away?
I honestly doubt it. Unsolved crimes, they tend to linger in the collective memory of a place. Even when life moves on, there's always that question mark hanging over everything, that shadow of doubt, every strange noise in the night, every unfamiliar face passing through. It all takes on a different meaning when you know something like that is possible.
It really highlights how these crimes affect so many people, not just the victims and their families. It makes you wonder, why are we still so captivated by these unsolved mysteries, even after all this time? What is it about a case like Hinterkaifeck that continues to draw us in?
I think it's that, basic human desire to solve puzzles, to find the answer. And when those answers remain out of reach, well, the mystery just deepens. We're drawn to the unknown. That idea that maybe, just maybe, we can figure it out where others haven't.
We become detectives in our own minds,
Yeah.
trying to fit those pieces together. And maybe there's also a part of us that wants to learn from these tragedies. Understand what might have motivated the killer, the warning signs maybe, even see if we can find a way to prevent something like this from happening again.
Yeah, that's a powerful motivator for sure. We examine these cases not just for the thrill of the unknown, but also for the insights they might offer into human behavior, the darkness that can lurk within seemingly ordinary people.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground today, haven't we? From that chilling crime scene to the killer's bizarre actions afterwards, the family secrets, the limitations of the investigation. But like any good mystery, I guess, we're left with more questions than answers.
That's I guess you could say, the beauty and the frustration of Hinterkaifeck. It makes us think critically, look at things from different angles, and face the fact that sometimes there are no easy answers, no satisfying conclusions.
It kind of leaves you with a question, doesn't it? If you were an investigator standing in that silent farmhouse back in 1922, where would you even start? What would catch your attention? What path would you choose to follow?
It's a question that can definitely keep you up at night.
Well, that's it for our deep dive into the Hinterkaifeck murders, a case that continues to fascinate, to frustrate, to remind us that some mysteries may never be fully solved. But I think that's what keeps us coming back, isn't it? The desire to learn, to explore, to try to understand. So until next time, keep your minds curious and remember, sometimes the most captivating stories are those that leave us with questions.